Chapter 6. Deacon. The lobby was empty when Deacon returned to his seat. He wondered briefly where the hooded man had gone, but figured he must have just been waiting on a ride. Still, why had he seemed familiar? Deacon had only been back for a day, so it was doubtful he'd seen the man in that time. Was he someone from Deacon's past? But it had been years since he'd been here, so surely that wasn't it. The bigger question remained, was he someone Deacon should worry about? Did he have any connection to what was going on with Shonda? With a sigh, Deacon ran his hand across his chin. He wasn't used to having so many questions, especially ones that he couldn't answer. Eyes closed, he prayed again for wisdom, and Eric's face filled his mind. Eric had been a friend when he'd been on the force nearly a decade ago, but they'd lost touch when Deacon turned to the bottle. Was God trying to tell him to contact Eric? Could he help? He didn't even know if Eric was still in town, but he supposed it was worth a shot. And unless he was one of the rats, it probably wouldn't hurt to contact him. So Deacon pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name. He should probably update his contacts. Some of them he barely remembered anymore. Hadn't known them well in his previous life. But every time he had thought about deleting them, something had stopped him. Maybe it had been for this moment, for this purpose. After all, Eric would have been one of those numbers deleted. Deacon marveled again at how God always had an influence in his life, even when he didn't see it at first. Deacon's fingers hovered over the keypad. Should he type this message? Would Eric remember who he was? Or should he call? Although that conversation felt weird in his head as he practiced how it might go. "Hey, Eric, it's Deacon. Remember me? No? Well, can you tell me if there's a giant cover-up happening regarding Shonda Turner?" Okay, it probably wouldn't go quite that awkwardly, but however he played it out felt wrong. So in the end, he decided on a text, but he kept it vague. If Eric agreed to meet up, he could drop the questions on him in person. "Eric, it's Deacon Jackson. Not sure if you remember me, but I'm in town and would love to catch up. Staying at the Blue Ridge Hotel." With the message sent, Deacon leaned back to wait for Shonda to finish up. She emerged from the room an hour later, but something was off. Her motions were stiff, robotic, and her eyes seemed to stare off into space. Deacon hurried over to her. "Shonda, is everything okay?" She blinked a few times before turning to meet his eyes. "Yeah, everything is fine. Why?" Even her words were slow and stilted. Deacon looked over his shoulder to see the receptionist/office manager, or whatever she was, watching them. So he pasted on a smile and shook his head. "No reason. You ready?" He would tell her his concerns later, when eyes he didn't trust weren't watching them. Shonda nodded and Deacon took her arm, afraid that she might hurt herself if she wasn't being guided. He had no idea what the doctor had done to her, but this wasn't normal, and he couldn't let her come back here. Shonda said nothing as he led her to the truck. She climbed into the passenger seat with his help as if in a trance. She remained silent the entire drive home as well, though at one point her hand brushed the smooth leather of the seat, and a tiny smile pulled at her lips. Something had definitely been done to her. As he pulled onto her street, he scanned the area for any unknown cars, and then parked in the driveway in front of her house. But Shonda made no move to get out. She just stared, her eyes glassy, her face drawn. Deacon put his hand on her arm. "Are you all right?" Shonda looked down at his hand on her arm, blinked, and slowly shook her head. "I don't think so." He reached for her hand and gently pulled her from the car. "Come on," he said, leading her to the door. "Let's get you inside." Shonda obediently followed him, her feet shuffling on the sidewalk. He opened the door and she crossed over the threshold, one step at a time. He followed close behind her, watching her carefully. She seemed to be in a fog, and he wasn't sure he should leave her. She crossed through the living room, then stopped and turned around to face him. Her eyes were wide and her mouth slightly opened. She looked as if she was about to say something, but no words came out. Deacon felt a chill run through him. Something was wrong. He stepped closer to her and said her name softly. "Shonda?" She just stared at him. She seemed to be looking right through him. Her eyes were unfocused, and he thought he saw a flicker of recognition in them, as if she were trying to remember something, but it was gone as soon as it had appeared. He tried again. "Shonda, are you okay?" She blinked and nodded slowly. Then she turned away and continued toward the kitchen. He watched her go, feeling a deep sense of unease. There was no way he could leave her like this. With a start, he realized there were plenty of sharp objects that she could hurt herself with in the kitchen. He quickly followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. But she wasn't holding a knife when he entered. In fact, she wasn't doing anything but staring at the countertop. "I feel like I was going to do something," she said, looking up at him, "but I can't remember what." Deacon stepped closer and took her hand. "Do you remember anything from the therapist's office?" She tilted her head. "The therapist." Her brow furrowed. "He didn't like that you were there." "Yeah, I gathered that. But did anything happen? Did he give you something to eat or drink?" Shonda shook her head. "I don't think so. It's so hazy, though." Her free hand rubbed her forehead. "And my head hurts. Why does my head hurt?" Deacon dropped her hand and leaned back against the counter, folding his arms across his chest. "Well, I don't know for sure, but I have the feeling that he either drugged you or hypnotized you. I'm leaning towards drugs, as I've watched a few hypnotisms and never seen anyone so groggy afterwards." Her eyes grew wide. What if it was both? Maybe I was resistant to being hypnotized, so he drugged me. I was nervous, so maybe that affects things. "It's possible. I don't know much about how it works, but I don't think you should go back." She chewed on her bottom lip and nodded. "Yeah, you're probably right. Thankfully, the next appointment isn't for another week, but I better figure out what to do about my job, because when I stop going, they might fire me." "Hopefully, we'll have this figured out before then, but if not, we'll find you a job at another hospital." Shonda sighed and shook her head. "I should have just kept my mouth shut. If I hadn't pushed to get the cops to believe me, maybe this wouldn't be happening." Deacon shook his head. "You know that's not true. Fentanyl is killing so many people. We can't just turn a blind eye to it." She sighed and tucked her hair behind her ear. "I know, but what good is it if the people who can stop it are corrupt?" "I have to believe there are some who aren't. While you were with the therapist, I reached out to an old friend on the force, one I trust. We'll see what he says if he responds." "Yeah, okay." Shonda nodded, but she didn't look convinced at all. "Do you want me to stay?" "No, that's okay. I'm feeling less foggy now. Plus, I haven't told Dante about you yet. I'd like to do that before he just finds you here." "Sure. Just let me know if you need anything." He hesitated, not sure how his next words would be received, but knowing he had to say them. "Just don't wait too long to tell Dante what's going on. You don't need to scare him, but he needs to be mindful to watch his surroundings, especially when you're not there." Shonda nodded. "I will, and thanks for everything, Deacon." He flashed her a small smile and let himself out of the house, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over.